And now, the survival show that once survived a 1911 versus Glock debate with itself. In this episode, we sit down with Justin Carroll to discuss revolvers for survival and EDC. He's going to share with us why he ditched all his beloved semi-autos and went all-wheel gun all the time. Howdy, and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 202. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Justin, welcome back to In the Rabbit Hole.
Aaron, thank you so much for having me on.
Dude, we always have so much fun when you come on, but this time we're not going to geek out on tech stuff. We are going to geek out on revolvers, which I will admit to being more than a novice on. I would say bumbling buffoon. And as we were talking about it a second ago, I had one revolver one time. It was a 642, a Smith & Wesson 642 airweight in 32 or 38 rather. That my original co-host, Jonathan, talked me into getting, and I shot it twice impromptu, then stuck it in the safe, and 6 years later said, I'm selling this damn thing and getting another Glock. So that was my experience with revolvers, although every episode of The Walking Dead, I find myself wanting a Colt Python for no good reason. But talk to us about revolvers. How did you get into them? Well,
unfortunately, Aaron, I think that is probably the experience that many people have with revolvers, especially we can sidetrack about J-frames later, but especially the very small revolvers. I think a lot of people get them, shoot them, find out they are absolutely not what they expected, and then they spend a lot of time sitting in a drawer or a safe somewhere. So I got into revolvers a little over a year ago. I decided to go out to my local Thursday night match with a revolver and just see what happened. And I put a couple of weeks in of some good dry practice. I had really no formal training on revolvers, and just decided, you know what, I'm gonna see what happens if I really apply myself. If I find some YouTube videos about how to actually reload a revolver, and see what happens. So I took it out. Actually did much better than I expected. A lot of people, I think, were kind of surprised, to include myself. I'm really kind of shocked at what I was able to pull off. So that kind of lit the fire. I ended up selling all my Glocks, all my auto loaders, and wow. I've kind of stuck with the wheel gun thing. At the time, I was carrying a 6-hour P938. I promptly got rid of that and got myself a Smith & Wesson 640 Pro Series, and that's my carry gun currently. And I've been on the revolver kick ever since.
So I understand gun kicks. I have I'm on a Beowulf, a 50 caliber Beowulf kick right now, thanks in part to Mark, a listener and good friend. I blame all of that on him. But then, I mean, I've had other kicks, like Jonathan regularly gets me into the lever action gun kick and things like that. I'm susceptible to whims of gun fancy. But I've never just sold off everything and said, I'm going all in on this one thing. So how did revolvers get to the point for you where you were like, to heck with all these Glocks and fancy semi-autos, I'm going old school? How did that happen?
So there were a couple of factors at play here, and I sometimes write for the Lucky Gunner Lounge, and I kind of penned this a little bit in an article, but I was moving to the West Coast, to a state that is fairly firearms unfriendly. You could probably narrow that down pretty easily, mm-hmm. And so that was one factor at play. And also, you and I have talked offline. My work, I travel extensively for work. So in any given month, I might be in all four corners of the country. And I if at all possible, always try to take a gun with me. And one thing that you'll find pretty quickly if you travel around a lot is that your 17 round Glock magazines aren't always legal where you're going. And that's always a frustrating thing. Like, well, do I carry something different than what I'm used to carrying, or do I cave and try to scratch up some 10 round magazines, or like what is my strategy here? What do I do? So that was kind of another thing kind of pushing me in that direction. And I admit I've just always kind of had a fascination with the revolvers. I have a pre-lock Smith & Wesson 686 that I bought, probably 12, 13 years ago, if memory serves, for about $350. And I never really gave it I'd taken it to the range maybe half a dozen times in that, previous 10 plus years. And I've always been fascinated by the thing and always said, if I could only have one, this would be the one. So when it came time to move, I said, you know what, this is what I'm going to do. So I went ahead and went with it, and for better or worse, here I am.
So, but I guess the question is, how did it become so, like, what is it about revolvers that you fell so in love with that you felt justified in getting rid of your other guns? Or was it just more of an economics thing? Like, okay, well, I want this collection of revolvers that are kind of pricey, so I'm just going to liquidate these semi-autos because of the advantages I find with a revolver.
No, it wasn't necessarily that, because it's not as if I have a dozen revolvers now. I have a very manageable, small handful. So there's a couple of factors there. I have always kind of looked at the 357 revolver as kind of the, kind of do it all general purpose handgun. You can load it really, really hot with ammo from Buffalo Bore, Double Tap, or hand loads with hard cast lead and hunt, medium sized game. You can load it down to 38 wad cutters that anyone can shoot and not be intimidated by. It's just kind of this all around thing. And I've always been fascinated by that concept. So also at work there was my desire to minimize the amount of ammunition and kind of standardize on a caliber, which is talked about quite a bit in people that talk about survival stuff. And I thought, you know what, if I could have all my guns eat 38 or 357 or both, which is kind of where I've landed now. I don't own any 38 specials. I do shoot 38 specials in some guns, more or less exclusively. But I like that, or single caliber ability. I don't have to stock 9mm and 357 and 45 or whatever. I have my one caliber that I want. That's the two ammos that I buy are my 357 defense ammo and my 38 defense ammo. And then I load my practice ammo. Another piece of that for me is, again, I'll allude to magazines. So constant source of frustration with me. I've gone through a number of kicks too. I've been on 10mm kicks and old Smith & Wesson 3rd generation stainless steel autoloader kicks and whatever. And magazines are always like, you never feel like you have enough. It's an endless point of frustration for me. When something happens and all of a sudden Glock magazines are selling for $75 a piece or what, like I never reached that point where it's like, I have enough, I'm good. I don't need to worry about this or think about buying more. So another big benefit to the revolver that I like is I don't have to have any magazines. They don't wear out, and magazines are expendable. Let's be honest. And if I don't have any magazines, my gun isn't a really fancy single shot. It still functions exactly the way it was intended, which there's also a lot of downsides to revolvers, and we can get into that. But those were kind of the things that the ammo thing, the magazine thing were really big for me.
That makes sense. Do you find, and we're not really in any sort of an ammo shortage really anymore, except 22, which just seems to never want to come back.
Right.
And speaking to that, I may have seen a movie once where somebody had somewhere in the neighborhood of a few tens of thousands of 22, and it still didn't feel like they had enough. So I totally understand the magazine thing because I have that problem too. But yeah, that makes sense. So what was the training like? You said you went on to YouTube and watched some videos. Did you? And now for a quick break. Listeners, do you get at least $3 a month worth of value out of ITRH? We'd love to give you more. Visit itrh.net to find out about membership benefits. For starters, members get access to every episode ever produced and a monthly virtual conference. That's just for starters. And it's important to note, In the Rabbit Hole is supported nearly entirely by Roving Horde Armada members, just like you. That's how we pay the bills, stay on the air, keep the lights on around here. So go to itrh.net to learn how you can become part of the ITRH Roving Horde Armada. Next up, subscribe to the show through your favorite podcast app to make sure you never miss an episode by going to intherabbithole.com/iTunes or intherabbithole.com/Stitcher or intherabbithole.com/iHeartRadio or intherabbithole.com/Google Play. Or if you are one of those weirdos who listen to the show through YouTube, you can go to intherabbithole.com/YouTube because you know what? We support weirdos. However weird you want to be, we're all about that. Now, back to the show. What was the training like? You said you went on to YouTube and watched some videos. Did you do any other kind of training with it? Were there products you ended up buying to get into it? How did the learning about revolvers work for you?
So I initially kind of got my start just learning what I could from the internet, which is it's probably not the best way to go about it. And one thing you'll learn rather quickly if you are a pretty decent pistol shooter, if you've had some formal training. And my formal training on the 1911 and the Glock is pretty considerable. I was in the Marine Corps in the Force Reconnaissance Platoon and a Marine Special Operations team, where we trained almost constantly with the 1911. I got out, I worked as a contractor with another government agency where we trained more or less constantly with the Glock 17. And one thing you'll learn very, very quickly is, with the exception of some very basic fundamentals like sight alignment, trigger control, and stance, not a lot of those marksmanship fundamentals translate, or those pistol operator fundamentals, we'll call them, really translate over to revolvers. So your malfunction clearances. The first time I was on a match and I pulled the trigger and I didn't get a bang, I brought the revolver up into my workspace and started to do a tack, rack, bang before I realized, oh, wait, idiot, wrong gun. Yeah. So reloads are an entirely different animal. You start talking about gear setup even. With a pistol, your reloads are on your weak side, and you grab those magazines with your weak hand, support hand, other strong hand, whatever your preferred terminology is. On a revolver, your strong hand is used to reload, so your reloads are carried on your strong side. Just little things that I had to learn kind of on my own through process of elimination. And then I've attended two courses in that intervening time. One for revolvers. It was a 2-day course that I got just an immense amount of information out of. And then a not revolver. It was actually a more geared toward your common pistol, your more common handguns these days class. And I was the only revolver shooter there. Actually ended up doing pretty well, but that was after I kind of established that foundation. And the thing that scared me specifically with revolvers was reloads, because like a lot of people that shoot revolvers in competition will tell you, your revolver is always empty. In a competition, you have 6 rounds. If you're carrying a smaller revolver, you've got 5. If you're carrying a much bigger revolver, you might have 7 or 8. But that's on the very outside extreme compared to even your very small single stack 9mm, where you have 7 or 8 rounds just as a matter of course. And if you need to reload, you're moving a pre-staged, preloaded box of ammunition into the gun rather than individual rounds. So reloads was really a thing that I spent most of my time on, other than just revolver grip, which is a little bit different than the thumbs forward grip that most of us use with semi-automatic handguns. That's the thing that I continually try to reinforce through live fire, dry practice, and training, is that reload, because probably with your Glock 19 with 15+1, you might need it, you might not. And I'm not saying don't practice a reload, you should, but you should maybe place a little less emphasis on it than someone who carries a 5-round gun.
That makes sense. So as far as, and we're just gonna, we already agreed that this would just kind of be a free flow bounce around session.
Sure.
What have you taken apart and started? You strike me as a tinkerer. Have you taken them apart and started tinkering with them yet?
I have, yeah. So one of the first things I bought, actually, after getting like a good quality holster and some speed loaders and some speed loader holders, was a book called The Complete Book of Revolver Assembly and Disassembly. And I took my 686 completely apart and put it all back together just to see kind of how it works, because it's really kind of a steampunk fan's dream to look at those inner workings. Got all these gears and levers and things that interact with other things. I take that back. I started to say I haven't tried any DIY trigger jobs. I did put an Apex tactical trigger kit or duty carry spring kit in my J frame, which, man, I carry one on a daily basis. Possibly the worst modern revolver design as far as shootability goes.
Well, hold that thought for 2 seconds, because
Sure.
I'm actually still curious about the inner workings, because I know that is an ongoing, and there's been disagreement about it just in the survival and preparedness community. I know Mill Tappins, who was a wonderful firearms writer, talked a little bit about revolvers, and he wasn't a huge fan of revolvers. He was, and I kind of am more of it in his school of, I appreciate the one gun concept, but at the end of the day, they are tools. You don't try to use a Phillips head screwdriver to fix everything in your house. So just out of curiosity, though, because there's also a lot of people like, oh, revolvers are a lot more reliable and all this other stuff. And I can't claim that I could still do this, but I had gotten to the point where I could completely break a Glock down to its absolute most basic parts and then put it back together again in about a minute and 20. And so as far as the inner workings of a revolver, which I've never seen, and I've never stopped, now I just realized I've never stopped to really look at the innards. Are they more complicated, and is it harder as like if you needed to replace parts or do anything, or is it the same or simple? How does that pan out?
So I think it's slightly more complicated, and you have all these Smith & Wesson revolvers aren't as bad as some other designs as far as being able to, say, drop in a hammer if you need to replace a hammer, for instance, because you have a lot of bearing surfaces and a lot of things that work with other things and have to have a smooth interface between that other thing, whatever it is. So it's completely, I'm not going to say completely, it's fairly out of the realm of, I'm going to drop a new fill in the blank into this gun and just expect it to run like you would a Glock. You could buy a Glock, order a new barrel, trigger kit, whatever you want from Lone Wolf or whoever, drop it in and take it to the range and expect it to run like a top. Because of that very kind of precise interface between multiple parts, revolvers are much less friendly as far as that is concerned. And when we talk about revolver reliability, they are typically fairly reliable. Unfortunately, when they do go down, they go down pretty hard. And anyone who has never seen their revolver malfunction has probably never shot it enough. I've seen a pretty wide gamut of malfunctions in wheel guns, and it's just a fact of life, and it's kind of something that you accept. It's probably not going to happen, but if it does, and it's anything other than a light primer strike, I'm going to have a problem.
See, that's good to know, and that's interesting. That sheds a lot of light on that aspect of it, and I think that doesn't necessarily dismiss their reliability, but it's like you said, when they go down hard. So that's good to know. But to take us back to J-frames again, tell me about J-frames. Again, I know this episode's going to be all over the place, but tell me about J-frames.
Okay, sure. So I carry a J-frame, a Smith & Wesson 640 Pro series, and I landed on that because basically the 640 Pro diverges or corrects a lot of the issues that are inherent in J-frames. First of all, most of them have fairly small grips and are fairly small guns to begin with, which means there's increased recoil, especially when you get into the alloy frame models, aluminum frame or scandium frame guns. Even with even with fairly mild 38 special, they can be fairly intimidating for people that aren't kind of seasoned handgunners to shoot. And even for me, I don't want to shoot. I don't want to go to the range with 400 rounds and put it through my J-frame. It's just not a fun day. So also endemic to that, or contributing to the accuracy problems, Smith & Wesson uses a coil spring as the mainspring in J-frame revolvers rather than a leaf spring, which they use in their K&L and frame revolvers. It's a much heavier trigger pull. So my carry gun that I carry now, I gauged out the trigger. It maxed out my pull gauge, which maxes out at 12 pounds. It was too heavy to read. And sadly, that's not uncommon at all. So very small grip, very light gun, very heavy trigger pull. And then most J-frames typically have absolutely horrible, bordering on unusable sights. So you've got the little trench in the milled into the top strap and the tiny little front sight blade. And then like we add on top of that things like an incredibly short sight radius and an incredibly small gun. So you have a lot of flash and blast. They're just probably not the absolute best gun for, unfortunately, a lot of people buy them as their first gun or buy them for their wife or whatever the case may be. I would love for that not to happen because they're really kind of intimidating to shoot. The J-frame is kind of, I think, the expert's gun. So my 640 is an all steel gun. It's heavy. It's way heavier than most of the carry guns that I've actually carried on a daily basis. It also has Novak night sights. Comes from the factory like that. It's a fairly expensive J-frame for a J-frame, but like those features alone are kind of a game changer. And then, like I mentioned, I upgraded the trigger to an Apex tactical kit that dropped it down to about 9.5 pounds. And I put some VZ grips. They're not longer. They don't extend past the frame, but they're actually a little bit wider and fill the hand a little better. And I can actually, I'm pretty confident in that setup. But J-frames generally, man, I have a lot of complaints about them.
Yeah. So what do you actually recommend for people? Like if somebody was just going to start tomorrow and say, yeah, that revolver thing sounds like fun, I'm going to go get me one. What's one that people actually should start with?
I would first ask, what's your use case? Are you going to carry it on a daily basis, or is this something you're going to carry in the field and don't have to worry about concealment, or is it a home defense nightstand survival gun?
Well, let's do all three then.
That'd be the first place I would start. So I think the Ruger SP101, if you're looking for a J-frame class gun, probably far outclasses the Smith & Wesson J-frame. The trigger pulls are generally much more manageable. They do have a special Talo edition that has like some really nice sights on it. It's an all steel gun, so it's fairly heavy. If you're looking for a carry gun, that would be an option. I've also shot the Kimber K6S, which is Kimber's new revolver. It's J-frame size and feel. It's actually a 6-shot gun. Again, all steel. It's got a good amount of heft to it. Unless you're going to pocket carry this thing just on occasion or something like that, I would stay away from the super airweight, super lightweight Smith & Wesson guns.
Yeah, that's why I ended up with that 642. I was looking for in something the hot, steamy, damp nastiness that are Houston summers with 110 degrees and 80% humidity. I was like, I really want something I could just stick in the pocket of my shorts. And that's how I ended up with the 642, which of course I promptly never really carried. So.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for I'll skip over the middle weights here and jump to the heavier weights. If you're looking for a field gun or a nightstand gun, man, I'm a complete and total devotee of the Smith & Wesson 686. I don't know why. My 686 and probably the next one I buy, 4-inch barrel. And this is a gun. I have an older one, actually. I got really fortunate when I bought this because I didn't really know what I was doing, but I bought an older pre-lock gun that had the hammer mounted firing pin. It's only a 6-shot gun, but the gun it's a substantial gun. I wouldn't want to carry this concealed for any amount of time at all. It's very heavy, which does a lot of things for you. It helps you hold the gun a little bit more stable if you're trying to do some precision work with it. It absorbs recoil like nobody's business. You can shoot the gun pretty quickly. That's usually what I take to the range, to be quite honest. I'd say you couldn't go wrong there, or with Ruger's kind of competing offering, the GP100. Excellent revolver, and both of those are going to come with good sights, good adjustable sights. If you get into that Smith & Wesson K and L frame line, which is their medium frame and their medium large frame line, you're not going to have an issue finding things like aftermarket sights or grips or holsters or whatever it is you're looking for. That's probably where I would go with that. If you're looking for a strictly self-defense gun, double action only is really all you need. That single action feature is kind of superfluous in a true self-defense sense. So if you are going with a J frame or something like that, I would recommend a bobbed hammer or a quote unquote hammerless design. It's, like I say, it's completely superfluous in the self-defense application. Mm-hmm. On my 686, however, I do maintain that it is a double action, single action, and I do like that because I do routinely shoot that gun at 100 plus yards, and if I'm trying to milk a little bit more accuracy out of it, it's kind of nice to have that single action capability.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever found that the hammers, the non-bobbed hammers, do actually grab on things?
I haven't found that, but that is probably because I've just not had enough experience actually carrying those. So the first revolver I actually ever bought and owned and carried, I carried it for quite some time, was a 3-inch Smith & Wesson Model 60, which did have the standard Smith & Wesson hammer. But at the time I was in the military, I couldn't, I had to go on base every day, so I couldn't carry every day or all the time. So I really just kind of carried in a very limited capacity. I didn't find that to be an issue, but I was also pretty inexperienced at the time. I wasn't really training or practicing a lot. But yeah, I think that's a viable concern, to be quite honest. Like a lot of the revolver stuff, I think is kind of overblown, but that is a really viable concern in my opinion.
Okay. To go back to the reloads for a second, because I'm still thinking about that. And I remember when I had the revolver, I kept thinking, man, if I got to reload this thing, and then I was like, well, what are the odds I actually I'm going to try to reload in the middle of a defensive situation? But I mean, these things, of course, they do come through. And at the end of the day, I'm used to having a lot of rounds in a gun. You're obviously a very experienced shooter. How long did it take you to get to the point where you could reload under time in a manner you felt was sufficient for some sort of defensive situation?
Man, that's a tough question. So defensively, I'll address defensively and then what I did in competition separately. So I started down this road in competition, and I when I was kind of a little more hardcore into it, I would try to dry practice for at least an hour a day. And when I was spinning up to get started with revolvers, a good chunk of that hour was just taken up with reload. So I would break that reload down into discrete steps. So bringing the handgun back from full extension, opening the cylinder and ejecting the empties. I would do that over and over and over. And then bringing the gun up into my workspace and bringing the speed loader to it. And then lining up 2 rounds with 2 charge holes and actually dropping those in. I would just repeat that process over and over and over again. And probably within 2 weeks, I was okay, but not really to the point where I wanted to be. After maybe 2 months of doing that and doing it consistently, and I'm not saying you have to go all in hour a day every day for 2 months, but and your mileage may vary a little bit, but at that point I was feeling pretty strong on that. On the defensive side, and this is another downside with revolvers. The problem with carrying a speed loader is it's round and it's fat, and there's really no good place on your body to put it. It doesn't really fit in a pocket unless you're going to wear a speed reloader pouch on your belt. There's not a great place to put it. So I actually carry 2 Bianchi speed strips. in my back pocket where they sit flat, and I kind of interlock those a little bit. To answer your question completely honestly and frankly, I don't know that I'm still to the point where I am 100% satisfied with how quickly I can empty that gun and get it back up with a full charge. I don't know that I ever will be completely satisfied with that. It's kind of a continuous evolution. That's something I work on every single time. Every single time I go to the range, I dump my carry ammo out, set it on the bench. I don't administratively drop 5 rounds into the gun, 5 practice rounds. I'll actually load them out of that speed strip. I'll come out of the holster, present, come back, and go through the whole process every single time, just to kind of build those neural pathways like any weapon. I think that's pretty critical. And that was something that was kind of drilled into me in the military. Even when you're reloading for that very first magazine of the day, you reload as if your life depended on it.
That's a good practice and a good mindset to keep. And I guess that kind of those two things together bring up the question of, are you judging the speed, and or when you say whether or not you're comfortable, is that based on your personal experience with someone who was training with a 1911? What I'm guessing was a shitload. So,
yeah. So, for a period of about a year, every single day that we were at work, if we were not actually out on a patrol, 100 rounds of 45 and 120 rounds of 5.56 every single day at a bare bones minimum. So yeah, I kind of had to undo some habits from shooting semi-automatic handguns, which quite honestly took a little bit of time. If you fall into maybe a lower experience level, it may take much less time if this is something you're actually inclined to do, to fully switch over. But yeah, my comparison is I'm not really comparing that J-frame reload from speed strips to reloading a 1911 or a Glock. I do compare my 686 with speed loaders to that, and I'm still not quite there, but I'm almost. I'm creeping up on it. I don't know if I'll ever be as fast, but I'm really, really close. But reloading that 5-shot gun from speed strips, there's no way it's ever going to be as fast. I think if you put me against someone else with a revolver with speed loaders, I'd probably do better than some, not as good as others. But I don't know that I will ever be 100% satisfied that yes, I can do this at a speed that I'm happy with. So, which is maybe where I want to be, because that is always pushing me to train a little harder.
Right. I have a good friend that always say, discontent breeds perfection. Let me ask a different way. So did you ever get to a point with your 1911 where you were up to a speed that you were happy with or satisfied with? So we'll reverse the question.
Yeah. I was, but I was also a lot younger and more naive at the time. Man, this is kind of constant evolution of someone that shoots a lot. I've been in places where I'm completely 100% happy with where I'm at. And that's quite honestly, that's when I really get lazy and really get to the point where I don't feel like I have to dry practice, nearly as much. And then next thing you know, 3 weeks have gone by. I haven't pulled the gun out of the bag once. And yeah, I have been at that point. I don't know that was necessarily a wise decision on my part.
Okay. I guess I was just trying to figure out, so whether it was an issue for, as far as your personal feeling about your speed, I was just trying to figure out, was this an issue semi-automatic versus revolver, or was it personal neuroses, which I fully appreciate. That's not a knock, being someone crazy myself. So that's all I was trying to figure out with that.
Okay, so yeah, with my completely non-committal, ambiguous answer here, to answer your question in no uncertain terms, I am still much, much happier with my ability to reload a semi-automatic handgun quickly than I am with my ability to reload a revolver quickly. With that being said, I think I can get that J-frame back up and running pretty quickly. Could it be better? Yeah, definitely. Should it be? Yeah, it should be. And that's that probably eats up way too much of my free time at night.
I gotcha. I can appreciate that. So this are the speed strips purely just concealability, or why the speed strips if they're slower? I'm kind of asking an obvious question, I think, but I mean, you could surprise me.
No, really, it is. It is just a concealability issue. Man, I wish I were the hardcore guy that was like, yeah, I roll out with a full frame gun and two speed loaders every single day. But I do carry every single day if I'm in a place where I'm legally allowed to do so. But we all have that balance of basically the pain tolerance for what we're willing to put up with, and throwing two speed loaders on my belt, or finding, man, people that pocket carry guns amaze me, because I have so much crap in my pockets already that finding a
Right.
pocket with nothing in it to put a gun in is just not an option for me. So yeah, it definitely is a compromise decision there. And I know it's probably not the answer I should be giving, but just being completely upfront there.
I think that's true. And I mean, that's true of anyone who carries. I mean, carrying a gun on a daily basis is an exercise in both discomfort and compromises. So I trust me, I totally get that. And I think anybody who says otherwise must wear a duty belt every day and can wear whatever ton of bat paraphernalia on their utility belt they want to. But for the rest of us, we're pretty limited to how much stuff and where we can stick it when our jobs are not jobs that actually do involve carrying a firearm every day. So, that makes perfect sense.
I'm a pretty small guy, man. I'm 5'9", 155 pounds. Which may be a cop out. I'm sure I could probably carry something bigger, but and I also spend a lot of time in the South and the Southwest where it's jeans or shorts and a t-shirt. So that's kind of part of my decision too.
Yeah, I totally get, and it especially if you are in a hot and humid climate, like you were just saying, on a regular basis. I mean, I'm in Houston, and so it's, other than the 3 months out of the year where we get cool weather, and even that is from year to year debatable, what most of the time is just really freaking hot. And heck, one of the reasons I got stopped carrying a SIG and started carrying a Glock is because I kept sweating all over my SIGs and, quite frankly, ruining them and just rusting out several key components. Which there's a jammed magazine release button will confuse the crap out of you if you've never had that problem before. And I had that problem several times, and finally ended up having to have I had to take them to the gunsmith and had to have all of the magazine release buttons have a special coating put on them. And the gunsmith was laughing at me. He was like, "I'm surprised you went on with it for this long. I have to do this for a lot of people." So yeah, I don't think it's a cop out at all. I mean, there is certainly a point where you're only willing to be only so miserable. So that makes perfect sense. So we've talked about the advantage, we've talked about what you like, and we've talked about some very practical things. What are the disadvantages here of revolvers?
Well, there's quite a few of them. They're fairly considerable, and I think anyone that is completely sold on revolvers and doesn't acknowledge these is being a little bit intellectually dishonest. So I obviously am a fan of revolvers. That being said, I'd probably be much better served by a Smith & Wesson M&P 9C or Glock 19 or pick your favorite repeating autoloader. So very limited capacity. So at probably the upper edge of what most people are willing to carry, you're going to be carrying a 6-round gun. I'm not going to debate whether how many rounds you're using gunfights or whatever. That's another conversation for someone who knows a lot more than I do. But you are going to be limited severely by capacity. By contrast, you take a Glock 17 with one in the chamber, that's 18 rounds. That is a 6-round revolver plus 2 reloads. So that revolver guy would have to reload 2 times, run his gun empty twice, and then reload that 3rd time and run his gun empty to end up at the same place as that Glock guy. That's a pretty considerable disadvantage. Complicating that a little bit, reloads are harder and take longer, even with the exception of a very few top competitors. Reloads will almost invariably be slower than a similarly capable individual shooting an auto-loading handgun. So that's another factor. Like I mentioned earlier, you're moving a pre-staged, preloaded box of ammunition into a gun. You're basically doing a part swap rather than loading 6 individual cartridges into 6 individual charge holes. So that's a factor too. Revolvers they're fat. All the rounds are contained in that cylinder that revolves, and that's typically what rides right under your belt line if you carry these inside the waistband. As probably most of us carry everything we carry. And then we've already talked about the issue of carrying reloads. If you carry speed loaders, they're big and bulky and fat, and it's hard to find a place to put them. Revolvers don't have a reciprocating slide like your Glocks. They don't have a nice polymer frame that flexes with recoil like your Glocks. So basically all of that recoil is going back into this basically solid metal framed gun that's being transferred right into your hands. And then it's a double action trigger pull, which I actually am finding is not as much a disadvantage as you would think, but a lot of people don't like that. So actually quite a few things that you should think about if you're thinking about switching to a revolver. You should definitely acknowledge these things and be honest with yourself about what you're giving up by doing so.
Well, that's some great stuff. But at the end of the day, you still love yours. So people overcome those challenges.
I do. And maybe for, like you say, maybe for some irrational reasons, it's a tool. Maybe I'm not, maybe I'm trying to drive that nail with a screwdriver just because I really, really happen to like the way that screwdriver looks and feels in my hand. And then there's just another intangible element to that screwdriver that really makes me happy inside. But does that necessarily mean it's the best choice? No. But bottom line, these are kind of competing viewpoints here, but we don't carry guns because we're optimistic, right? That's why we carry guns in the first place and carry reloads and things like that. But having a gun on you that you're willing to carry puts you already in the 99th percentile of preparedness or whatever you want to call it versus that 99% of people who don't carry a gun at all. And that's a statistic that I just made up. You can make up a statistic to prove anything.
Right,
14% of all people know that. So I think by having anything, you're better off than nothing. But yeah, there are probably better options than a revolver. I'll just be completely honest about that. Now, when we talk like long-term survival situation, which is kind of the focus of your show, man, you'd be hard pressed to convince me that anything is really better than a revolver in that case.
Explore that. Let's go into those reasons. You
have that like kind of insane ammunition capability, right? Your gun is mechanically operated by the power that you impart to it through your trigger finger. That turns a cylinder, it cocks the hammer, and then at a certain point the hammer is released and it fires. It's not gas operated, so you can fire anything from literally blanks all the way up to whatever the hottest, highest pressure, highest velocity, heaviest round your gun is rated to fire can fire. And frequently in revolvers, that means you can fire a couple different calibers or a couple different loadings. So 357, you can shoot 38s. 327 Federal, which I'm kind of taking a shine to lately, you can shoot 32 H&R Magnum, 32 Smith & Wesson. And I think there's one more that you can shoot in there, 32 Smith & Wesson short maybe. So you've got a little bit of ammo flexibility there. You don't always have to find like exactly, if you had a Glock and you found a bunch of 9x18, well, guess what? You found a bunch of ammo that has nothing to do with your gun and won't work. But if you have a 357 and you find a pile of 38, you've got some ammo that'll work, that'll run your gun. And we can expand on that a little bit if you're really into this. And this is kind of an investment that I am going to make. You can have a 9mm cylinder made for your 357 Magnum revolver. And that's kind of
cool.
It's kind of just a financial thing for me right now because 9mm is so like factory loaded 9mm is so incredibly cheap. I don't know that I can reload 357 cheaper than it. So it kind of makes sense to me from just a practice perspective. I mean, if you had that 357 revolver with that, now you're talking 3 different cartridges that you can run in that gun. And inherent in that, I think, is some flexibility in what you can do with the gun. Everything from small game all the way up through, we'll stick with 357 up to, bear small black bear, deer, boar, everything in that range, and then 100% amply capable self-defense gun. Really hard to argue with the 125 grain full power 357 Magnum.
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking bigger calibers, 44 Magnum, 45 Colt, and up, we start to become a little bit limited again. I think that 357 Magnum is just kind of that sweet spot, and I'm maybe it's not so much revolvers I'm hung up on. It's 350. It's a 357 Magnum cartridge, and it just so happens to mostly come in revolvers.
Yeah, I think the times I've been tempted to pick up another revolver, it's been a 357. And one of the other reasons is I also keep looking at the 357 lever guns, but of course I keep looking at the 357 and the 30-30, and most of that is Jonathan's fault. But that's what friends are for, to talk you in, continually try to talk you into guns that you don't already have, because the wife loves that. So. Yeah, I totally get that. And I think that also speaks to, and you even brought it up, we've actually brought it up a couple of times as far as a field gun goes and hunting with them. Do you feel that there's more advantages to a revolver as a field gun than there are, say, a semi-auto, or is it kind of a wash?
Yeah, as far as a field gun, I do kind of think there's more advantages there. When you're talking a 9mm 40 Smith & Wesson 45 ACP as a field gun, that really only kind of does one thing well, and that is, or really well, is the thing that it's optimized to do, which is defend you against other humans. I think the revolver is much more broadly capable, generally speaking, than that. And if you want to talk like boutique kind of calibers, we'll call them like maybe 357 SIG or 10mm. Those probably bring some of those same attributes to the table as a 357, but again, you have much less return on investment there, because in a 10mm auto loader, you can't dip down to those super low powered powder puff rounds for target practice or plinking or small game harvesting or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I don't think there's quite the versatility there. I think most of our modern semi-automatic handguns, at least the mainstream ones, are optimized kind of with one distinct purpose in mind. Mm-hmm. And even if we talk, about things like the new Glock 10mm long slide, which, man, I'm still like just such a 10mm fanboy, and I can't even tell you why.
Miami Vice. It's all about Miami Vice, man.
Man, it just blows my skirt up for some reason.
Yeah.
Even if we're talking that long slide 10mm Glock, now you're talking a gun that's like, revolvers are big. Like my 686 is way bigger than a Glock 17, but that long slide Glock it's a considerably sized handgun, mm-hmm. and you still don't get quite the capability. It was kind of designed for competition or hunting, not much else.
I don't think I'd want to carry that thing around every day.
Yeah, no, definitely not. It's definitely sexy. It definitely, man, I don't know why I'm so into the 10. Honestly, I should buy a 9mm and be happy like everybody else, but it's not how my brain works, I guess.
I think that was, I can appreciate that, because I still have a 357 SIG that I should part with, because I hardly ever shoot it. Really, I joke that the only time I take it out to shoot it is to annoy other people at the range. But it's just a fun, very loud, very aggressive bang, and it's just fun which I think that's for a lot of gun enthusiasts. That's part of it is sometimes we just want things to go bang really loud, and so yeah, definitely. Well, Justin, man, you've got a new blog coming out, and shockingly, there's going to be some revolver stuff in this new blog of yours. So tell us about it. What is the blog? What are you doing with it? And what can we gain from it?
Absolutely. So this is the very aptly named revolverguy.com. And this is pretty much it completely diverges from my other privacy security blog, in that it deals with Revolvers, which it just kind of a personal outlet to write about things that I like to write about instead of things that I write about for work. So the primary topic will be revolvers.
Awesome. What's the website address one more time?
That is revolverguy.com.
Awesome. Well, Justin, man, as always, it has been a pleasure having you on. And of course, talking about guns. I mean, what could possibly blow my skirt up more? I'll talk about anything to do with guns. So, dude, it is awesome. And we'll have to have you on again sometime soon.
Great. Thanks for having me, Aaron.
Show notes, links to Justin, and things mentioned in this episode, and resources can be found at intherrabbithole.com/E202. Support the show. Visit itrh.net to get membership benefits and become part of the ITRH Roving Horde Armada. That's itrh.net. With that, we wrap up episode number 202 from the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.